The lone traveler passed by an old abandoned graveyard at midnight. It was so late that he didn't even see the sign warning him that it was closed after dark. He walked right through the rusty wrought-iron gates and continued on his way. He had been walking for hours and was exhausted, but he didn't dare stop and rest because the longer he stayed there, the more tired he would get, and the harder it would be to leave. The road ahead was dark and lonely, and he could feel the eyes of the dead watching him as he passed their graves. As he walked, he could feel the temperature drop around him and the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The silence was broken only by the sound of his own footsteps and the wind blowing through the trees. The moon was full and bright that night, casting an eerie glow over the graveyard. But it was not enough to light his way. The shadows were deep, and the silence was heavy. Suddenly he heard a whisper in the darkness. At first he thought it was just the wind, but then he heard another one, and then another. They were coming from all around him, and he couldn't tell if they were coming from above or below. "Help me," they whispered. "Save me." He tried to ignore them, but the voices grew louder and more insistent. He quickened his pace, desperate to get away from the sound, but the whispers followed him like a bad dream. And then he realized that they were not just whispering, they were calling his name. He stopped in his tracks and turned around to face the voices, but all he saw was the dark outline of a tree in the moonlight. The voices started again, this time closer and more urgent. "Help me," they whispered. "Save me." The traveler hesitated, torn between his desire to escape the voices and his morbid curiosity. What was out there in the darkness? Who was trying to speak to him? Was it safe to listen? He took a deep breath and forced himself to stay still. He listened intently, trying to make out what the voices were saying. In the distance, he heard the sound of footsteps approaching him. He froze, afraid to move or make a sound. Then he heard a voice. "Hello," it said. "Can you hear me?" The voice was soft, but it was getting closer now. He could feel the presence of the speaker, though he still couldn't see him in the darkness. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice echoing in the stillness. But the only response was silence. Then the footsteps stopped. The traveler held his breath, waiting for whatever was out there to reveal itself. But nothing happened. After a few moments, he started to relax. Maybe it had been his imagination. Maybe there was nothing out there in the darkness after all. But then he heard a whisper in his ear, so close he could feel the breath of the speaker on his cheek. "Don't trust him," it said. "He's not who you think he is." The traveler jumped, startled by the sudden appearance of the voice. He turned to look for the source, but there was nothing there. The darkness was all around him, and the only sound he could hear was the beating of his own heart. As the traveler continued on his way, he could feel the presence of the whispers growing stronger. He could feel their cold touch on his skin, and he could hear their voices in his head. "Don't trust him," they whispered. "He's not who you think he is." He tried to shake off the feeling, but it only got worse. And then he started to see things out of the corner of his eye, dark shapes that seemed to be following him. He could feel their eyes on him, cold and accusing. He broke into a run, desperate to escape the feeling that he was being hunted. He could hear the whispers behind him, growing louder and more insistent. "Don't trust him," they whispered. "He's not who you think he is." He ran until his lungs were burning and his legs were aching. But the whispers never stopped, and then he stumbled and fell, his ankle twisting beneath him. He cried out in pain, but the whispers only grew louder. "Help me," they whispered. "Save me." The traveler lay on the ground, defeated, as the whispers closed in on him. He felt their icy fingers digging into his skin, and he could hear their voices in his head, demanding that he help them. But he didn't know what to do. He was just a traveler passing through. He didn't know any of these people, and he didn't want to get involved in their problems. But the whispers kept coming, and they wouldn't stop until he did something. Finally, he gave in and reached out his hand towards the darkness. "What do you want from me?" he asked. A cold wind swept through the graveyard, and the traveler could feel the dead leaves swirling around him. In the distance, he heard the sound of a woman's voice. It was soft, but it was getting closer now. He could feel the presence of the speaker, though he still couldn't see her in the darkness. "Hello," she said. "Can you hear me?" The traveler hesitated, unsure how to respond. He wanted to call out, but he was afraid of what might happen. But then the voice spoke again, and he knew he had to say something. "Who's there?" he asked, his voice echoing in the stillness. The voice came closer still. "My name is Eliza," she said, "and I need your help." The traveler's heart skipped a beat. He knew this voice. He had heard it before, but where? He racked his brain, trying to remember, but it was no use. He couldn't place it. "Eliza," he repeated, testing the name on his tongue. "I think I know you, but I can't quite remember." The voice sighed. "It doesn't matter," she said. "What matters is that you are here now. Can you hear me?" "Yes," the traveler replied. "I hear you." "Good," she said. "Then listen carefully. I have something important to tell you." The traveler leaned closer, straining to hear what she had to say. He could feel the presence of the other voices growing stronger, and he knew that they were listening in on their conversation. "This graveyard," Eliza began, "it's not just a graveyard. It's a prison." The traveler frowned. "A prison?" he echoed. "What do you mean?" "These people," Eliza said, gesturing to the graves around them. "They are not dead. They are trapped here, and they need your help to break the curse that keeps them here." The traveler shook his head, confused. "I don't understand," he said. "How can they be trapped here if they're dead?" "They are not dead," Eliza said firmly. "They are alive, and they need our help. Will you help us?" The traveler looked out over the graves, and for the first time he could see that they were moving. The headstones were shifting, and the ground beneath them was trembling. "I don't know," he said, his voice shaking. "I don't know if I can." "You have to," Eliza said, her voice urgent. "If you don't, we will be trapped here forever." The traveler took a deep breath and closed his eyes, trying to steady himself. When he opened them again, he looked out over the graves and saw that they were gone. In their place was a dark, gaping hole that seemed to stretch on forever. He could feel the cold breath of the dead on his neck, and he could hear their voices whispering in his ear. "Thank you," they whispered. "Now we are free." Then he felt something cold and clammy grab his ankle and pull him down into the hole. He screamed as he fell, but his cry was lost in the darkness. When he finally landed, he was in a dark, dank place that smelled of decay and death. He could feel the weight of the dead pressing down on him, and he could hear their voices echoing all around him. "Welcome to hell," they whispered. "We've been waiting for you."